The clock on the wall showed 6:30 p.m., but for Maya, it felt like the day had already stretched on forever. Her feet ached in her old black sneakers as she wiped down table after table at Antonio's family restaurant. The small Italian place had seen better days, but it was home to her now. She'd been working here for almost a year, picking up every extra shift she could get. Maya moved quickly between the red checkered tables, balancing plates of steaming spaghetti and fresh garlic bread. The smell of oregano and tomato sauce filled the air, mixing with the chatter of families enjoying their dinner. She smiled at each customer, even when her back hurt from carrying heavy trays all day long. In the corner of the restaurant sat an old black piano. Nobody had touched it in years. Dust covered its smooth surface, and some of the keys looked yellowed with age. The restaurant owner, Mr. Antonio, had told her it used to be the heart of the place. Musicians would play while people ate, filling the room with beautiful melodies. But those days were long gone now. Maya often found herself looking at that piano during quiet moments. Sometimes when she was cleaning nearby tables, she would run her fingers along its edge. The wood felt smooth and cold under her touch. She wondered what songs it could play, what stories it might tell if someone gave it a chance to sing again. Her life hadn't always been about serving food and cleaning tables. 3 years ago, everything was different. She had dreams then, big, dreams that seemed possible. She was studying music at the local college, spending hours each day practicing piano pieces that made her heart soar. Her small apartment had an old, upright piano that her grandmother had given her. Every morning she would wake up excited to learn something new. But life has a way of changing plans when you least expect it. Her grandmother, the only family she had left, got sick. Really sick. The medical bills started piling up like snow in winter. Maya watched her savings disappear dollar by dollar as she tried to take care of the woman who had raised her. The college tuition became impossible to pay. Her dreams of becoming a professional pianist slowly faded away like old photographs. Now, instead of playing Chopin and Mozart, Maya carried plates and counted tips. Instead of performing on stage, she performed the daily dance of restaurant service. Take the order, bring the food, clear the table, smile, repeat. Day after day, week after week, month after month. But music never really leaves you. Even as she worked, Maya found herself humming softly. Classical melodies would flow through her mind as she folded napkins or filled water glasses. Sometimes other workers would hear her and smile. They had no idea that these simple hums were pieces from some of the world's greatest composers, stored in her memory like precious jewels. The restaurant had its regular customers. There was Mrs. Chen, who came in every Tuesday for chicken parmesan, and always left exactly 15% tip. There was the young couple who sat in booth 7 every Friday, sharing a large pizza and talking about their future together. And there were the college students who ordered the cheapest items on the menu and stayed for hours, studying over empty plates. Maya treated them all the same way, with kindness and respect. She remembered their usual orders and asked about their families. She brought extra breadsticks to the students and made sure Mrs. Chen's chicken was always perfectly cooked. This was more than just a job to her. These people were part of her world now. But not every customer was kind. Some treated her like she was invisible, snapping their fingers to get her attention or complaining about things she couldn't control. Others would look right through her as if she wasn't even human. These moments hurt, but Maya had learned to push through them. She needed this job. Her grandmother's medicine was expensive, and the rent on their tiny apartment was due every month without fail. The hardest part wasn't the long hours or the difficult customers. It was the feeling that she was slowly forgetting who she used to be. Every day that passed without touching piano keys felt like losing a piece of herself. Her fingers would sometimes move on their own, playing invisible songs on the edge of tables when she thought no one was looking. Late at night, when the restaurant was closed and she was alone doing final cleanup, Maya would sometimes stop and stare at that old piano. She would imagine herself sitting on the bench, her fingers dancing across the keys, filling the empty room with music. But imagination was all it ever was. The piano stayed silent, and Maya stayed in her role as just another waitress in just another restaurant. She often wondered what would happen if she ever did sit down and play. Would anyone care? Would anyone even notice? The thought both excited and terrified her. What if she had forgotten how? What if years of not practicing had stolen away her ability? What if the dream she had buried was gone forever? These questions followed her home each night as she climbed the stairs to her small apartment. She would check on her grandmother, help her with her medication, and then fall into bed exhausted. Morning would come too soon and the cycle would begin again. Another day, another dollar, another step further away from the person she used to be. But deep inside, in a place she rarely let herself visit anymore, Maya still believed in magic. She still believed that music had the power to change everything. She just didn't know that in a few short hours, that belief would be put to the ultimate test. She had no idea that tomorrow would be the day her two worlds would finally collide in the most unexpected way possible. Friday evening started like any other night at Antonio's. The dinner rush was in full swing and Maya was running between tables with her usual energy. She had gotten good at reading the room, knowing which customers needed extra attention and which ones preferred to be left alone with their food. But tonight felt different somehow. There was a tension in the air that Maya couldn't quite put her finger on. Maybe it was because the restaurant was busier than usual, or maybe it was because she hadn't slept well the night before. Her grandmother had been having trouble breathing, and Maya had stayed up most of the night making sure she was okay. Everything changed when the group at table 12 arrived. 4 people in expensive suits walked in like they owned the place. The men wore watches that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. The women carried purses with designer names that Maya recognized from magazine covers. They looked around the small restaurant with expressions that made it clear they thought they were too good for this place. Maya approached their table with her usual smile. "Good evening. Welcome to Antonio's. Can I start you off with some drinks? Tonight?" The man closest to her didn't even look up from his phone. "We'll have a bottle of your best wine, and make sure the glasses are actually clean this time." Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she kept her voice steady. "Of course, sir. I'll bring that right out for you." As she walked to get their wine, she heard them talking loudly about how quaint the restaurant was, using a tone that made the words sound like an insult. They complained about the music being too loud, even though it was barely audible. They said the lighting was too dim, even though other customers seemed perfectly comfortable. When Maya returned with their wine, they barely acknowledged her presence. She poured each glass carefully, making sure not to spill a single drop. But, instead of thanks, she got more complaints. "This wine tastes cheap," said one of the women, wrinkling her nose. "Don't you have anything better?" "I can check with my manager about our wine selection," Maya offered politely. "Never mind," the woman waved her hand dismissively. "Just bring us your menus. And please, try to recommend something that won't poison us." Maya's hands shook slightly as she handed out the menus. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but something about this group felt meaner than usual. They seemed to enjoy making her uncomfortable, like it was some kind of game to them. When she came back to take their order, things got worse. Nothing on the menu was good enough for them. They asked for modifications that the kitchen couldn't do, then acted like it was Maya's fault when she explained the limitations. They demanded to know why the pasta couldn't be made with ingredients the restaurant didn't have. They questioned every price like Maya had personally set them too high. "Is this really the best this place can do?" asked one of the men, looking directly at Maya like she was responsible for everything wrong with their experience. "I'm sorry you're not satisfied," Maya said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'd be happy to ask the manager to come speak with you." "Oh, don't bother." The man laughed. "I'm sure he's just as incompetent as the rest of the staff here." The other customers were starting to notice the commotion. Maya could feel their eyes on her as she stood there, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. She had been trained to always stay professional no matter what. "The customer is always right," Mr. Antonio had told her. But these customers weren't just wrong, they were cruel. When their food finally arrived, Maya thought the worst might be over. She was wrong. "This is cold," declared one of the women, even though steam was still rising from her plate. The sauce is too thick, complained another without even tasting it. I asked for no onions, said the third, pointing to her plate that clearly had no onions on it. Each complaint felt like a small cut, but Maya handled them all with grace. She offered to have the kitchen remake everything. She brought extra bread and refilled their water glasses without being asked. She did everything she could think of to make their experience better. But they weren't interested in having a better experience. They seemed to enjoy having someone to look down on. As the evening went on, their comments became more personal and more cruel. They talked loudly about how some people just aren't meant for better things in life. They wondered out loud why someone would choose to be a waitress instead of getting a real job. They made jokes about education and intelligence, all while looking directly at Maya. The breaking point came when Maya was clearing their plates. She had carefully stacked everything on her tray, being extra careful because her hands were shaking with suppressed emotion. But as she turned to leave, one of the men deliberately stuck out his foot. Maya stumbled but managed to catch herself before falling. The plates clattered loudly, but nothing broke. The entire restaurant went quiet for a moment, everyone looking to see what had happened. "Oops," the man said with a smirk. "Maybe you should watch where you're going next time." His friends laughed, like it was the funniest thing they had ever seen. But Maya could see that other customers were uncomfortable now. Some were shaking their heads in disapproval. Others were looking away, embarrassed to witness such cruelty. Maya set the tray down, carefully on a nearby table. Her whole body was trembling now, not with fear, but with something much more powerful. For months she had been holding back parts of herself, being only what other people expected her to be. She had been playing it safe, staying small, accepting that this was just how life was now. But standing there in that moment with these strangers treating her like she was less than human, something inside Maya broke free. All the music she had been holding inside, all the dreams she had buried, all the passion she had locked away, it all came rushing back at once. She looked across the restaurant and saw that old piano sitting in the corner. For the first time in months, it didn't look dusty and forgotten. It looked like it was waiting for her. Maya took off her apron slowly, deliberately. She folded it neatly and placed it on the table next to the tray of dishes. The group at table 12 was still laughing and making jokes, completely unaware that something fundamental had just shifted in the room. Every step toward the piano felt like walking through deep water. Maya could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She could feel every eye in the restaurant following her movement. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. This moment had been building for too long. When she reached the piano bench, Maya paused. Her fingers hovered over the fallboard that covered the keys. This was it. This was the moment when her old life and her hidden life would finally meet. She had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in years, she didn't care about the consequences. She lifted the fallboard, and the keys seemed to gleam in the soft restaurant lighting, as if they had been waiting for this moment, as long as she had. Maya sat down on the piano bench and felt like she was coming home after a long journey. Her fingers found their way to the keys without hesitation, as if no time had passed since her last practice session 3 years ago. The touch was familiar, like greeting an old friend who had been waiting patiently for her return. She closed her eyes and let her fingers rest on the keys for just a moment. In that silence, she could hear her grandmother's voice from years ago. "Music isn't something you do, Maya, it's something you are." She'd forgotten those words during all the months of carrying plates and counting tips, but now they came flooding back with crystal clarity. The first notes that flowed from the piano were soft and gentle, the opening of Debussy's Claire de Lune. It was one of the first advanced pieces she had ever learned, and her fingers remembered every delicate phrase, every subtle change in dynamics. The melody floated through the restaurant like moonlight through water, pure and beautiful, and impossible to ignore. The change in the room was immediate and dramatic. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the kitchen staff peeked through the window to see what was happening. The group at table 12, who had been so loud and obnoxious just moments before, fell completely, silent. But Maya wasn't playing for them anymore. She wasn't playing for anyone except herself and the music that had been trapped inside her for so long. Years of suppressed emotion poured out through her fingertips, transforming the simple restaurant into something magical. The piano responded to her touch like it had been waiting for this moment as much as she had. Despite its age and the dust that had covered it, the instrument sang with a clear, sweet voice that filled every corner of the room. Each note was perfectly in tune, as if the piano had maintained itself through sheer hope that someone would eventually return to play it. As the Debussy piece came to its gentle conclusion, Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes. But she didn't stop playing. Instead, she let the music carry her to the next piece and then the next. Her repertoire came back to her like muscle memory, each composition as fresh in her mind as if she had practiced it yesterday. She moved into a Bach invention, her fingers dancing across the keys with precision and grace. The mathematical beauty of Bach's composition created patterns in the air that seemed to make perfect sense, even to people who had never studied music theory. The melody lines wove together like conversation between old friends, each voice distinct, but harmonious. Mr. Antonio emerged from the kitchen, his white apron still tied around his waist, flour dusting his hands. He had owned this restaurant for 20 years, and he had heard many pianists play on that old instrument back in the day. But he had never heard anything like this. The music Maya was creating wasn't just technically perfect. It was alive, with emotion and meaning. The other customers began to move their chairs, turning them to face the piano so they could see Maya as she played. They did this quietly, respectfully, not wanting to disturb the music that was transforming their ordinary Friday dinner into something extraordinary. Parents shushed their children gently, but the kids didn't need shushing. Even the youngest, one seemed to understand that something special was happening. Maya transitioned seamlessly into a Chopin nocturne, one of the most beautiful and emotional pieces ever written for piano. This was where her true gift became apparent. It wasn't just her technical skill, though that was impressive enough. It was the way she could make the piano speak, the way she could use music to express feelings that had no words. The melody soared and dipped like a bird in flight, sometimes barely audible, sometimes filling the room with rich, full chords that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. Maya's whole body moved with the music, her shoulders swaying slightly, her head tilted as if she was listening to something the rest of them couldn't hear. In the third row of tables, an elderly man quietly wiped tears from his eyes. The music reminded him of his late wife who used to play piano for him in the evenings when they were young. At the corner booth, a young couple held hands tighter, feeling like the music was playing the soundtrack to their love story. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was happening at table 12. The four people who had been so cruel to Maya just minutes before sat in stunned silence, their faces showing a mixture of shock, shame, and growing appreciation. They were beginning to realize that the woman they had treated so poorly was not just a waitress. She was an artist of extraordinary talent. Maya moved into the second movement of a Mozart piano sonata, her touch becoming even more delicate and expressive. Mozart's music required a special kind of sensitivity, an ability to find the perfect balance between technical precision and emotional expression. Maya played it like she was telling a story, each phrase building on the last, creating a narrative that everyone in the room could follow even without words. The restaurant had completely transformed. The simple tables and chairs seemed to fade into the background. The checkered floor became a concert hall. The smell of pasta sauce mixed with the sound of classical music to create an atmosphere that none of them had ever experienced before. Maya herself seemed to glow as she played. The exhaustion and stress that had been weighing on her shoulders for months melted away. Her uniform, which had seemed like a costume that didn't quite fit, now looked like concert attire. She wasn't just a waitress who happened to know how to play piano. She was a musician who had been temporarily working as a waitress. As she finished the Mozart and moved into a passionate section of a Rachmaninoff prelude, the power of her playing intensified. This was music that demanded everything from the performer: technical skill, emotional depth, and physical strength. The piano sang and roared under her touch, expressing feelings that were too big for ordinary words. Some of the customers took out their phones, not to be disrespectful, but because they instinctively knew they were witnessing something that deserved to be recorded. They held their devices quietly, capturing not just the music but the moment when an ordinary evening became extraordinary. Maya played for almost 20 minutes, moving from piece to piece like she was telling the story of her life through music. There were gentle moments that spoke of childhood dreams and quiet hopes. There were powerful sections that expressed years of frustration and buried passion. And there were transcendent passages that seemed to reach toward something higher, something beyond the everyday struggles of work and bills and responsibilities. When she finally played the last note, the silence that followed was profound. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the presence of awe. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. They all just sat there, letting the final echoes of the music fade away, trying to process what they had just experienced. Maya's hands rested on the keys, for a moment longer as if she couldn't quite believe it was over. When she finally looked up, she saw a restaurant full of faces looking back at her, with expressions she had never seen directed toward her before. It wasn't the polite appreciation that customers sometimes showed when she remembered their usual order. It was something much deeper than that. It was recognition. For the first time in years, people were seeing Maya, not as a waitress, not as someone to order around or look down on, but as the extraordinary human being she had always been underneath her uniform. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever but was probably only 10 seconds. Then, somewhere in the back of the restaurant, one person began to clap. Slowly, others joined in, until the entire room erupted in applause that seemed to go on and on. Maya looked up from the piano keys, blinking as if waking up from a beautiful dream. The faces staring back at her were filled with amazement, respect, and something else she hadn't seen in a very long time. Recognition of her, true worth as a human being. But the most shocking transformation was at table 12. The 4 people who had been so cruel to her earlier were now on their feet, clapping harder than anyone else in the room. The man who had deliberately tried to trip her had tears streaming down his face. The woman who had complained about everything was shaking her head in disbelief, her mouth still slightly open in amazement. I had no idea, the woman whispered, though her voice carried in the quiet room. We had no idea who you were. Maya stood up slowly from the piano bench, her legs feeling a bit unsteady. She wasn't used to being the center of attention like this, especially not positive attention. For so many months, she had worked hard to be invisible, to blend into the background and do her job without drawing notice. Mr. Antonio was the first to approach her, his old eyes bright with unshed tears. Maya, he said softly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. In 20 years of owning this restaurant, I have never heard anything so beautiful. Why didn't you tell me you could play like this? Maya opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out at first. How could she explain the last 3 years of her life? How could she describe the way circumstances had forced her to bury the most important part of herself? How could she make anyone understand the fear that had kept her from touching those keys for so long? I used to study music. She finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. But life got complicated, and I had to stop. A woman from one of the middle tables stood up and walked over. Excuse me, she said politely. I'm Rachel Martinez, and I write about music for the City Tribune newspaper. What you just played was absolutely incredible. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions? Maya felt her heart racing. A reporter? She looked around the room and noticed that several people were still holding up their phones. Had they recorded her performance? The thought both excited and terrified her. I don't know what to say, Maya admitted honestly. This wasn't supposed to happen. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Meanwhile, at table 12, a quiet conversation was taking place. The group that had been so horrible to Maya was having what appeared to be a very serious discussion among themselves. Finally, the man who had tried to trip her walked over to where Maya was standing. Excuse me, he said, his voice shaky and uncertain. I need to apologize to you. What we did tonight was unforgivable. We treated you terribly, and we had no right to do that." He paused, looking down at his expensive shoes. "We didn't know, but that's no excuse. Even if you couldn't play a single note, we had no right to treat another human being the way we treated you." The other 3 members of his group had followed him over, and they all looked genuinely ashamed of their behavior. "We're so sorry," said one of the women. "There's nothing we can do to take back what we said and did, but please, know that we recognize how wrong we were." Maya studied their faces for a moment. She could see that their apologies were real, that witnessing her performance had genuinely changed something in them. But she also knew that apologies, while important, couldn't erase the pain they had caused. "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." The reporter, Rachel, had been listening to this exchange with great interest. "This is an incredible story," she said. "Not just your musical talent, but this whole situation. Would you be willing to let me write about what happened here tonight?" Before Maya could answer, Mr. Antonio stepped forward. "Maya, I want you to know something. This piano has been sitting here for 5 years without anyone playing it. I always hoped someone would bring it back to life, but I never imagined it would be someone who was already part of our family here." He looked around the restaurant, which was still buzzing with excitement and conversation about what they had just witnessed. "I want you to play here regularly, not as a waitress who happens to play piano, but as our official pianist. We'll work out a schedule that gives you time for both, and we'll pay you properly for your music." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Antonio, I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous, but I can't abandon my waitressing duties. I need this job." "You're not abandoning anything," he said with a warm smile. "You're expanding. This restaurant needs what you can bring to it, and I think you need this too." An older gentleman from one of the corner tables had been quietly listening to the conversation. Now he stood up and walked over, extending his hand to Maya. "I'm Dr. Harrison Webb," he said. "I'm the director of the Community Music Conservatory. I couldn't help but overhear that you used to study music. Have you ever considered returning to your studies?" Maya's breath caught in her throat. The conservatory was one of the most respected music schools in the region. She had dreamed of studying there when she was younger, but it had always seemed impossibly expensive and exclusive. I did want to continue studying," she admitted. "But the tuition is far beyond what I could ever afford." Dr. Webb smiled knowingly. "We have scholarship programs for exceptional talent. Based on what I heard tonight, I think you would qualify without question. Would you be interested in auditioning?" The room seemed to spin around Maya. Just 2 hours ago, she had been a struggling waitress, invisible to most of the world, carrying plates and accepting poor treatment because she needed the money. Now suddenly doors were opening that she had thought were permanently closed. "I would love to audition," she said, hardly believing the words were coming out of her mouth. "But I have responsibilities. My grandmother needs care and medical bills, and scholarships can cover living expenses too," Dr. Webb explained gently. "We believe in supporting our students completely so they can focus on their music." Rachel, the reporter, was frantically taking notes on her phone. "This is incredible," she kept murmuring. "What a story. What an absolutely incredible story." Other customers were starting to approach Maya, wanting to shake her hand to tell her how much her music had moved them. The elderly man who had been crying during her performance told her that her playing reminded him of his late wife. A young mother said her baby, who had been fussy all evening, had fallen asleep during the music. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when a teenage girl who had been dining with her parents shyly approached Maya. "I play piano too," she said quietly. "But I've been thinking about quitting because my friends say it's not cool. After hearing you tonight, I think I want to keep playing." Maya felt her heart swell with emotion. "Don't ever let anyone tell you that making beautiful music isn't worthwhile," she told the girl. "The world needs more beauty, not less." As the evening wound down and customers began to leave, many stopped to thank Maya personally. The group from table 12 left an enormous tip, far more money than Maya usually made in an entire week. They also left a handwritten note apologizing again and promising to be better people in the future. By the time the restaurant closed, Maya's entire world had changed. She had gone from being an invisible service worker to being seen, truly seen, by dozens of people. More than that, she had remembered who she really was underneath all the uniforms and the survival mode she had been living in. As she helped Mr. Antonio clean up, she kept looking over at the piano. It no longer looked dusty and forgotten. It looked like what it was, an instrument waiting to make music, just as she had been a musician waiting to make music again. "Thank you," she said to Mr. Antonio as they finished closing up. "For what?" he asked. "For giving me a place where this could happen," she replied. "For creating a space where someone like me could discover that dreams don't really die, they just wait." Mr. Antonio smiled and patted her shoulder. "Maya, I think we're all going to discover that tonight was just the beginning." Maya woke up the next morning wondering if the previous night had been an incredible dream. But when she checked her phone, she found 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and over 200 notifications from social media accounts she barely remembered having. Rachel Martinez, the reporter, had worked through the night to publish her story in the morning edition of the City Tribune. The headline read, "Hidden Talent Transforms Restaurant into Concert Hall." But that was just the beginning. Someone in the restaurant had recorded Maya's entire performance and posted it online. The video was spreading faster than wildfire. Within 12 hours, it had been viewed over 100,000 times. By the end of the week, that number had grown to over 2 million. But the numbers didn't capture what was really happening. People weren't just watching the video, they were sharing their own stories. Comments poured in from musicians who had given up their dreams, from service workers who felt invisible, from anyone who had ever buried a part of themselves to survive. "This gave me chills," wrote one person. "I haven't touched my violin in 10 years, but I'm getting it out of storage today." "I'm a cashier at a grocery store and I write poetry," shared another. "Watching this makes me feel like maybe I should start sharing my poems." "Thank you for reminding us that extraordinary people are everywhere, doing ordinary jobs, carrying extraordinary gifts," wrote a teacher from across the country. The video caught the attention of musicians and music lovers around the world. A famous pianist from London shared it with the comment, "Pure talent needs no stage. This woman could play in any concert hall in the world." A conductor from the New York Philharmonic wrote, "This is why we make music, to touch souls and remind we people of their humanity." Maya's phone rang constantly with interview requests from radio stations, television programs, and music blogs. She was overwhelmed and didn't know how to handle the sudden attention. Fortunately, Dr. Webb from the conservatory connected her with a music agent who helped her navigate the flood of opportunities. 3 weeks after that life-changing evening, Maya found herself standing on a real concert stage for the first time in her life. The local symphony had invited her to perform as a guest soloist with their orchestra. She wore a beautiful black dress that the symphony had provided, and her hands shook slightly as she walked toward the piano. But when her fingers touched the keys, all the nervousness disappeared. This was where she belonged. This was who she was meant to be. The audience of over 1,000 people gave her a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. After the concert, reporters interviewed her backstage. "How does it feel to go from being a waitress to performing with the symphony?" asked one journalist. Maya thought carefully before answering. "I think that's the wrong question," she said gently. "I was always a musician. I just happened to be working as a waitress to pay the bills. One of the most important things I've learned from this experience is that people are so much more than their job titles. The cashier at the grocery store might be a poet. The janitor at the office building might be an artist. We need to see each other more clearly." The scholarship to the conservatory came through exactly as Dr. Webb had promised. Maya was able to reduce her hours at the restaurant to part-time, spending her mornings studying music theory and technique, her afternoons practicing, and her evenings playing piano at Antonio's, which had become a popular destination for music lovers. Mr. Antonio had hired additional staff to handle the crowds that came to hear Maya play. The old piano had been professionally tuned and maintained, and it sang more beautifully than ever. But Maya never forgot her roots or the other staff members who had supported her through the difficult times. She used her newfound platform to advocate for service workers, speaking at conferences about treating all people with dignity and respect. She established a small scholarship fund for music students who, like her, had been forced to interrupt their studies due to financial hardship. The group from Table 12, the people who had been so cruel that first night, became unlikely supporters of Maya's mission. They had been genuinely changed by the experience and now volunteered with organizations that provided arts education to underprivileged communities. The man who had tried to trip her became one of the biggest donors to Maya's scholarship fund. That night taught me something I'll never forget, he told her during one of her concerts. Talent and worth aren't determined by someone's circumstances or their job. I was looking at you and seeing only a waitress, but you were always a brilliant musician. I was the one who was limited, not you. 6 months after her spontaneous performance, Maya received an invitation that took her breath away. Carnegie Hall in New York City wanted her to perform a solo recital. It was the dream of every classical pianist, and for Maya, it felt like the completion of a journey that had started years ago in her grandmother's living room. The night of the Carnegie Hall performance, Maya stood in the wings looking out at the most famous concert hall in America. The seats were filled with music lovers, critics, fellow musicians, and people who had traveled from around the world to hear her play. But in the front row sat the people who mattered most to her, her grandmother, who was finally healthy enough to travel, Mr. Antonio and the staff from the restaurant, Dr. Webb, Rachel Martinez, and even some of the regular customers who had become like family to her. As Maya walked onto the stage, she carried with her all the lessons of the past year. She had learned that dreams don't expire, they just wait. She had discovered that extraordinary moments can come from ordinary circumstances. Most importantly, she had realized that every person carries hidden depths, secret talents, and untold stories. She played that night like she had never played before, pouring her whole story into the music, the struggles, the discoveries, the transformation, and the gratitude. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet as one, applauding not just her technical skill, but her journey, her courage, and her refusal to let circumstances define her worth. After the concert, a young woman approached her at the stage door. I work 3 jobs to support my family, the woman said, and I sing in my car between shifts. Your story gives me hope that maybe someday. Maya stopped her gently. Not someday, she said with a warm smile. You're a singer now. Don't wait for permission or perfect circumstances. The world needs your voice today. As Maya looked back on that Friday night at Antonio's that had changed everything, she realized that the most important transformation hadn't been in her career or her circumstances. It had been in her understanding of herself and others. She had learned to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, the sacred in the everyday, and the infinite potential that exists in every human being. The old piano at Antonio's still sat in its corner, now polished and loved. Every evening Maya would play for the dinner crowd, and every evening people would remember that magic exists everywhere, in small restaurants, in unexpected moments, and in the hearts of people who refuse to give up on their dreams. And sometimes late at night when the restaurant was closed, Maya would sit at that piano and play softly, sending music out into the quiet world as a reminder that everyone, absolutely everyone, has something beautiful to offer, if given the chance to shine. The waitress had stepped up to the piano, and the whole world had stopped to listen. But more than that, the world had learned to see, really see, the person who had been there all along.